this morning in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Please be seated. The fourth Sunday of Advent always feels to me like I have been invited to spend Christmas at a relative's house at the last minute, and I haven't purchased any gifts. And so I walk around Walgreens or CVS thinking to myself, would they want that? Vitamins, maybe? Does that send a good message about health? No, I'm getting some no's from the crowd already. But there's a feeling in my mind that as we get ready for Advent to come to an end and we begin to embrace the true Christmas season, that if we haven't quite caught the Christmas spirit yet, it's best to just embrace it, let it come as it will, and just begin to live into the presence of Jesus. In other words, we've done what we can. Now it is time to allow Christ to do what He does. This morning, I know that many of us have kind of been going around shopping. For those of us who have children who have not been naughty, we have been doing that Christmas shopping. But I want you, each of you, to reflect on something this morning. What is the best Christmas gift you have ever received? Could be from any year, could be at any time, could be from any person. What is the best Christmas gift that you have ever received? I'm betting that it doesn't necessarily mean that the gift was expensive. It doesn't necessarily mean that the gift was big. It means more, in fact, that the Christmas gift you received kindled within you a sense of joy and love, not just for the gift that was received, but from the person who gave it. And that's why some of the best Christmas gifts I've ever received were something that was small and humble. But it was given to me by a person who I knew put great thought into it, by a person I knew who had great affection for me. In contrast, I acknowledge that Father Alex's memory is really starting to fade. Because last year I gave a relative a Christmas gift and said, here you go. And they opened it up and they kind of gave that half smile that you'll see when you give a person a gift and it doesn't kindle that joy. And I go, well, what's wrong? He says, well, this is lovely. This is a wonderful gift. It's just that you gave me the same thing last year. So as we look at today's gospel reading, we get to get a window view. We get to see what joy, real Christian joy, looks like. Because we get to see the reaction that Mary, the mother of God, and Elizabeth, her cousin, the mother of John the Baptist, have as their reaction to the news of what is to come. The news of the prophecies being fulfilled through their cooperation. And I want to emphasize, when I use the word joy, I don't mean the word happiness. This is something we've talked about before here at St. Vincent's, that happiness and joy are two very different things. Happiness is fleeting. Happiness is dependent often about the situation that we're in, something that we have received or has been taken away, a person that we might be with or a person we're no longer with. Happiness is very dependent on the world. Joy is completely independent of the world. Joy is 100% dependent on God. And so when we begin to see Mary's reaction and the song that she begins to proclaim, we start to get an idea that Christian joy begins with the presence of God. Because how can anyone be sad in the presence of God? And specifically, the presence of Jesus Christ. And so Mary's voice leaps up into song. And Elizabeth's child literally leaps for joy. Now, does this mean that Mary and Elizabeth weren't worried? Of course not. Any person with child will tell you there's anxiety involved. Were Mary and Elizabeth not aware of the gravity of the situation in which they found themselves? No, Mary was keenly aware that she was an unwed mother in first century Palestine. And that Elizabeth was also in a difficult situation in her family. So joy doesn't mean that there's not difficulty. Joy does not mean that there's not challenges. But how often do we focus so much on the challenge of God's blessing that we forget there's actual joy involved? Sometimes as we get to the last season of Advent, we've been absorbing so much of this prophetic teaching and preaching, some of it's a little bit doom and gloom, that we forget, wait a minute, the story has a happy ending. And each one of us has been invited to be an integral part of that story. Jesus Christ has come and will come again. That is something that should spark joy within us. But if it doesn't, what can we do to spread what is the true Christmas spirit? Well, first, we can do that one thing that God always wants us to do, which is get to know Him better. Just as I said at the beginning of getting to know Jesus is a joyful time, getting to know Jesus through prayer and scripture and discussions and fellowship, that's the real continuation of that joy. I liken it to when you first fall in love with somebody, but you don't really know them. You feel drawn to them, as if you're moving towards the light. And then when you finally get to know them, you move past that initial happiness joy, and you now move into the deep, abiding joy that comes just by simply being with that person. And Christ says, I am the light. So as you draw closer to me, two things are going to happen when you get close to the light. The first, it gets really bright and you want to look away. Right? Anybody here who ever had their eyes dilated will tell you, wait a little bit before you drive home. Be considerate for the rest of us. The second thing is that as you get closer to the light, the shadows get longer, don't they? Until they disappear completely. But you begin to see negative things. When you shine a light in your closet that you haven't looked at in a long time, you begin to see all the places where there's cobwebs, all the places where you haven't cleaned in God knows how many years. And what do? If that's our soul, we become disheartened. We say, why would Christ want to dwell with me? Why would Christ Himself come and be with me? In fact, when I hear the collect this morning, prepare a mansion, it feels almost intimidating, doesn't it? I don't know if I have a mansion. I have more like a tool shed. Maybe it's that one over there by the rectory. I don't feel sometimes that my soul is a mansion, but Christ Himself will say, this is where I wish to reside. And so as the light continues to come in, allow that light to purify all of those places where maybe Christ hasn't been dwelling for a while. Until finally, when we are fully encompassed by the light of Christ, we realize we don't have to be afraid of darkness anymore. We don't have to be afraid of anything anymore. Because this is the same Jesus Christ who came in humility, who ministered to the poor, to the lonely, to the lost, healed the sick, even raised the dead. And then this is the same Jesus Christ who we will go on a journey with Him over the next several months. So I urge you not to miss that in the readings. to hear how his ministry will become one of sacrifice on the cross. Until ultimately, at his resurrection, we realize, aha, that story at the beginning, I knew it was going to have a happy ending. So for those of you who are still missing a few gifts that you haven't purchased, it's okay. Just get a greeting card, write the word hug in it, and just say, I'm giving you a hug for Christmas. No? Okay, that went out. But if you feel that you're not ready for Christmas Eve to celebrate the birth of Christ, it's okay. Because Christ himself will come and will create in us a home that we could not create for ourselves. And looking ahead, it's that home where Christ wants to dwell that will grow each day in love. I remember when I was a kid, my parents didn't want my brother and I to go near the Christmas tree until it was time. And she wanted to build this sense of anticipation for us. And she always thought that she was smarter than her boys. She was, until we also grew up. And so I woke up in the middle of the night, my brother tapped me on the shoulder, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, we went to the back area of the house, and right across the entrance to the back room was wrapping paper to where you couldn't get through. But there was a hole underneath the bottom. So we went underneath, brought a couple of chairs, and we sat there, not disturbing the paper, waiting for my parents to wake up. And my mother, in great pride, began to take the paper down and find us there. I tell that story because those are the things that I want us to be thinking about. Those moments with family, and how those moments of family in our home are what this season really should be about. But that we should always, before we open our gifts, before we go down that road, to open up our scriptures and to say, this is the true joy that you will now experience